When my husband David stood in our kitchen after another failed business venture had collapsed under the weight of his poor decisions and complete lack of business acumen, pointed his finger at me with venomous rage, and screamed that I was useless and had never contributed anything meaningful to our marriage or our life together. His words ignited a fire of indignation and determination that had been building for years, as I watched him systematically destroy every opportunity I had given. Him while taking credit for my successes, and blaming me for his failures in a pattern of manipulation and gaslighting that had nearly convinced me that I was indeed the problem in our relationship. The irony of his accusation was devastating and infuriating, because the truth was exactly the opposite of what he claimed, as every business he had ever started or managed had been funded entirely by my inheritance from my grandmother, supported by my professional expertise in business management and financial planning, and salvaged repeatedly by my intervention when his arrogance and incompetence had led to disasters that would have destroyed everything if I hadn't stepped in to clean up the messes he created through his reckless decisions and refusal to listen to advice from someone he considered intellectually inferior, despite all evidence to the contrary. What David didn't know as he delivered his cruel assessment of my worth was that I had been quietly documenting every financial transaction, every business decision, and every contribution I had made to what he claimed were his successful ventures, and that the prenuptial agreement he had pressured me to sign 5 years earlier contained clauses that would allow me to recover every penny I had invested in his businesses if certain conditions were met, conditions that his verbal abuse and financial mismanagement had now satisfied in ways that would make him rue the day he ever called me useless while standing in a house that was mine, surrounded by possessions that were purchased with my money, and benefiting from a lifestyle that existed entirely because of my generosity and business expertise that he had consistently undervalued and disrespected throughout our increasingly toxic marriage. The business empire that David believed he had built through his own genius and entrepreneurial vision was actually a carefully constructed house of cards that existed only because of my financial backing, strategic planning, and constant intervention to prevent the complete disasters that his impulsive decision-making and ego-driven management style created on a regular basis when he ignored sound business principles in favor of flashy ideas and expensive investments that looked impressive but had no foundation in market research or financial reality. My grandmother's inheritance had provided the initial capital for his first business venture, a high-end restaurant that he had wanted to open despite having no experience in the hospitality industry and no understanding of the brutal economics that destroyed most new restaurants within their first year of operation. The restaurant project had been David's passion project and my first major mistake in enabling his grandiose delusions about his business capabilities, as I had provided not only the substantial startup funding, but also the business plan, financial projections, vendor relationships, and operational systems that had given the venture any chance of success, despite his complete lack of relevant experience or realistic understanding of what it would take to create a profitable business in such a competitive and demanding industry. His insistence on expensive decor, premium ingredients, and celebrity chef consultants had consumed nearly twice our original budget before the restaurant even opened, creating financial pressures that required additional injections of my inheritance money to keep the project moving forward toward what he promised would be spectacular success and recognition. The daily operations of the restaurant had revealed David's complete incompetence as a business manager, as he made impulsive decisions about staffing, inventory, pricing, and customer service that consistently undermined the professional standards and financial discipline that were essential for creating sustainable profitability in the restaurant industry. His tendency to hire attractive but inexperienced staff based on personal preference rather than qualifications had created service problems that drove away customers, while his insistence on serving expensive dishes that appealed to his sophisticated palate rather than understanding what our target market wanted and could afford had resulted in menu pricing that was uncompetitive and profit margins that made the business financially unsustainable, even when operating at full capacity. The first major crisis had occurred when David's poor inventory management and lack of attention to food costs had created a situation where the restaurant was losing money on every meal served, despite charging premium prices that were already straining our customer base and limiting our ability to attract the volume of diners necessary to cover our substantial fixed costs for rent, labor, and debt service. My intervention had involved completely restructuring the menu, renegotiating supplier contracts, implementing cost control systems, and personally managing the financial operations to prevent bankruptcy, while David continued to focus on what he considered the creative aspects of restaurant ownership without understanding that creativity without financial discipline was a recipe for disaster. The turnaround strategy that I had developed and implemented had transformed the failing restaurant into a modestly profitable operation within 6 months. But David had immediately taken credit for the success, while dismissing my contributions as minor administrative support that anyone could have provided if they had been willing to deal with the boring details that were beneath his attention as the visionary leader who had created the concept and guided its development. His public statements to friends, family, and business associates consistently portrayed me as a supportive wife who helped with paperwork, while he was the entrepreneurial genius who had built a successful business through his creativity, leadership, and business acumen that had overcome initial challenges through persistence and innovative problem-solving. The second business venture had been a retail clothing boutique that David had insisted would be his breakthrough into the fashion industry. Despite having no background in retail operations, fashion merchandising, or the specific challenges that faced small retailers competing against established brands and online shopping platforms that were transforming the industry in ways that made traditional brick-and-mortar stores increasingly difficult to operate profitably. The boutique project had required even more of my inheritance money than the restaurant, as David's vision for an upscale shopping experience included expensive renovations, high-end fixtures, and inventory purchases from designer brands that commanded premium wholesale prices, but had limited appeal to customers in our mid-sized city market. The boutique's failure had been swift and spectacular, as David's purchasing decisions were based on his personal taste, rather than market research or understanding of what our target customers wanted to buy at price points they could afford, resulting in inventory that sat unsold for months while generating carrying costs and storage expenses that consumed our operating capital without producing revenue. His attempts to attract customers through expensive advertising and promotional events had generated initial interest, but had failed to create repeat business because the merchandise selection and pricing strategy were fundamentally misaligned with local market conditions and customer preferences that he had never bothered to research or understand. The financial rescue of the boutique had required me to use my connections in the fashion industry to liquidate excess inventory at wholesale prices while negotiating with landlords and suppliers to restructure obligations that David's mismanagement had made impossible to meet through normal business operations. The process of closing the boutique and minimizing our losses had been emotionally and financially exhausting, but David had immediately begun planning his next business venture while blaming the boutique's failure on local customers who didn't appreciate quality and market conditions that were impossible for small businesses, rather than acknowledging that his poor planning and decision-making had created entirely predictable problems that better management could have avoided. The third business disaster had been a technology consulting firm that David had claimed would leverage the digital transformation trends that were creating opportunities for entrepreneurs who understood how to help traditional businesses adapt to new technologies and online marketing strategies that were becoming essential for competitive success in rapidly changing markets. The consulting firm had seemed like a better fit for David's background in computer science and his genuine enthusiasm for technology, but his approach to building the business had followed the same pattern of grandiose vision without practical implementation that had characterized his previous failed ventures. The consulting firm's offices had been designed and furnished to impress potential clients with expensive technology, modern furniture, and professional staging that projected success and expertise, but consumed enormous amounts of startup capital before the business had generated any revenue or proven its ability to deliver value to clients who were paying premium rates for services that they expected would solve real problems and produce measurable results. David's marketing efforts had focused on creating an impressive website and professional materials, rather than developing actual expertise in the consulting services he was promising to provide, creating a disconnect between the image he was projecting and the reality of what he could actually deliver to clients who hired the firm based on his promotional promises. The consulting projects that David had managed to secure through his marketing efforts had quickly revealed his limitations as both a technical expert and a business consultant, as he consistently overpromised results while underestimating the time and resources required to deliver effective solutions to complex business problems that required deep expertise and systematic approaches, rather than superficial advice based on popular business trends and technology buzzwords. His inability to manage client expectations or deliver results that justified his premium pricing had led to canceled contracts, negative reviews, and reputation damage that made it increasingly difficult to attract new clients who might have provided the revenue necessary to sustain the business. The financial collapse of the consulting firm had been the final straw that exhausted my inheritance and my patience with David's pattern of entrepreneurial failure, combined with his refusal to accept responsibility for poor decisions or learn from expensive mistakes that had cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars while producing nothing except frustration, debt, and marital tension that was destroying our relationship and my confidence in his ability to ever become the successful businessman he claimed to be. The liquidation of the consulting firm's assets had recovered only a fraction of our investment, leaving us with substantial debts and no remaining capital for future business ventures that David was already discussing, despite his complete lack of acknowledgement that his management approach was fundamentally flawed. The confrontation that led to David's declaration that I was useless had begun when I suggested that perhaps he should consider working for someone else, rather than continuing to start businesses that consistently failed, due to his lack of experience and realistic understanding of what it takes to build sustainable enterprises that generate profits rather than consuming investment capital while producing nothing except expensive lessons in how not to run a business. My suggestion that he might benefit from learning business management skills through employment with successful companies before risking our remaining resources on another doomed venture had triggered his defensive anger and accusations that I was being unsupportive and negative rather than acknowledging the obvious pattern of failure that had characterized every business he had attempted to manage. The escalation to personal attacks and character assassination had occurred when I presented documentation of our financial losses and my contributions to each of his failed businesses, including detailed records of my financial investments, strategic planning, operational improvements, and crisis management that had prevented even greater disasters than those we had already experienced through his poor decision-making and refusal to accept advice from someone with actual business education and experience. His response to this evidence had been to claim that my contributions had been minimal, and that any successes had been achieved despite my interference rather than because of my expertise and financial support that had made his ventures possible. The moment when David called me useless while standing in a kitchen that existed because of my inheritance money, in a house that I had purchased and maintained through my income and assets, surrounded by possessions that had been acquired through my financial resources and careful management, was the moment when I finally understood that our marriage had become a parasitic relationship where he extracted value from my resources while providing nothing except criticism, blame, and the kind of gaslighting that had nearly convinced me that I was indeed the problem in our partnership rather than the solution to his consistent failures. The decision to implement the prenuptial agreement clauses that would allow me to recover my investments and protect my remaining assets from further destruction through David's incompetence was made in the hours following his cruel assessment of my worth, as I realized that someone who could speak to me with such contempt while benefiting from my generosity had forfeited any right to continued access to resources that he had consistently wasted while claiming credit for successes that were entirely due to my contributions. The prenuptial agreement that David had insisted I sign had been designed to protect his assets in case of divorce, but the clauses I had insisted on including provided mechanisms for recovering my separate property investments if certain conditions related to business management and marital conduct were violated. The legal consultation that I arranged immediately after David's verbal abuse confirmed that his pattern of business mismanagement combined with his verbal assault on my character had satisfied the conditions that would allow me to invoke the asset recovery provisions of our prenuptial agreement, effectively giving me the legal authority to reclaim not only my original investments, but also any appreciation or assets that had been acquired through the use of my funds during our marriage. The attorney's review of my documentation revealed that I had maintained excellent records of every financial transaction and business decision, creating a clear paper trail that would support my claims and make it difficult for David to challenge my right to recover property that was legitimately mine under the terms of our marriage contract. The asset recovery process required careful coordination with financial institutions, business partners, and legal professionals to ensure that all transfers were conducted properly and that David's access to accounts and assets was terminated in ways that would prevent him from interfering with the recovery of property that belonged to me under the terms of our prenuptial agreement and applicable state laws governing separate property and business investments in marriage. The complexity of untangling our financial relationships required several days of intensive work with accountants and attorneys, but the documentation I had maintained throughout our marriage made the process much smoother than it might have been if I had not been so careful about recording my contributions and maintaining evidence of David's mismanagement. The chauffeured car that arrived at our house 3 days after David's verbal assault was the vehicle that would transport me to the final phase of reclaiming my life and my assets from someone who had consistently undervalued my contributions while overestimating his own abilities and importance in our relationship. The professional driver and luxury vehicle were symbols of the financial independence and success that I had achieved through my own efforts, in contrast to David's pattern of failure and dependence on resources that he had not earned and did not appreciate. The car also served a practical purpose of providing secure transportation for the legal documents and personal items that I would be collecting as part of the asset recovery process that would restore my financial independence. The confrontation that occurred when I returned to collect my belongings and execute the legal documents that would finalize the asset recovery was both satisfying and sad, as I watched David's arrogance and contempt transform into shock and disbelief when he realized that the woman he had called useless had outmaneuvered him legally and financially, while he had been focused on blaming her for his own failures and shortcomings. His attempts to negotiate or threaten his way out of the consequences of his behavior were pathetic and desperate, revealing his complete inability to accept responsibility for actions that had cost him access to resources and support that he had taken for granted while treating the provider of those benefits with disrespect and cruelty. The final accounting of assets that were recovered through the prenuptial agreement provisions revealed that David's successful businesses had actually been built entirely on my financial foundation, with every meaningful asset traceable to my inheritance or income, rather than to any value creation or business success that could be attributed to his management or entrepreneurial abilities. The business equipment, real estate, vehicles, and financial accounts that he had considered his property were legally mine under the terms of our marriage contract, leaving him with only personal possessions and debts that he had accumulated through his poor financial decisions and business failures. The immediate aftermath of the asset recovery was a period of mixed emotions, as I processed the end of a marriage that had consumed years of my life and substantial financial resources while providing little except frustration and disappointment in someone I had hoped would become a true partner in building something meaningful together. The relief of escaping from David's manipulation and financial irresponsibility was balanced by sadness about the failure of a relationship that I had entered with a genuine love and optimism about our potential to create a successful life partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. The financial independence that was restored through the asset recovery process provided immediate relief from the stress and uncertainty that had characterized the final years of our marriage, as David's business failures and poor decision-making had created constant anxiety about our financial security and future prospects. The recovery of my inheritance and business assets ensured that my financial position was actually stronger than it had been before marriage, as the appreciation and income generated by my investments had continued to grow despite David's attempts to redirect those resources toward his failing business ventures. The business opportunities that became available once I was no longer obligated to fund David's entrepreneurial disasters included investments and partnerships that had been impossible to pursue while my capital was tied up in his failed ventures, and my time was consumed with managing the crises that his poor decisions created on a regular basis. The freedom to make business decisions based on sound analysis rather than marital obligations opened up possibilities for building wealth and creating sustainable enterprises that would provide long-term security and satisfaction, rather than the constant stress and disappointment that had characterized my experience with David's approach to business ownership. The personal growth that followed my separation from David's toxic influence included rediscovering confidence in my own judgment and abilities that had been undermined by years of gaslighting and criticism from someone who consistently failed while blaming others for his shortcomings and refusing to learn from expensive mistakes that he repeated with predictable results. The therapy and self-reflection that accompanied this transition helped me understand how I had enabled David's destructive behavior while sacrificing my own needs and values in unsuccessful attempts to help someone who was determined to avoid responsibility for his own actions and their consequences. The new relationships that I developed in my post-divorce life were characterized by mutual respect and genuine partnership, rather than the one-sided support and constant crisis management that had defined my marriage to someone who took credit for my successes while blaming me for his failures, in a pattern that had nearly destroyed my self-esteem and confidence in my own abilities and worth as a person and business partner. Today, 5 years after arriving in a chauffeured car to reclaim my assets from someone who had called me useless while living entirely off my financial support and business expertise, I have built a successful consulting firm that helps other entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes that characterize David's approach to business ownership, while also providing services to individuals who need assistance recovering from financial abuse and manipulation in personal relationships that have exploited their generosity and trust. The business has grown rapidly through referrals from satisfied clients who appreciate working with someone who understands both the technical aspects of business management and the emotional challenges of dealing with partners who use manipulation and gaslighting to avoid accountability for poor decisions and destructive behavior. The wealth that I have accumulated through sound business principles and careful investment strategies has far exceeded what I lost during my marriage to David, demonstrating that his assessment of my abilities and worth was not only cruel, but completely inaccurate and revealing his own insecurity and incompetence rather than any limitation on my part. The financial independence and business success that I have achieved provide security and options for the future, while also creating opportunities to help others who have faced similar challenges in relationships with people who mistake generosity for weakness and who use emotional manipulation to exploit their partner's resources and support. The lesson that emerged from this experience is that people who consistently fail while blaming others for their problems often reveal their own character defects and limitations when their victims finally establish boundaries and refuse to continue enabling destructive behavior that serves no purpose except protecting the manipulator's ego from the consequences of their own poor choices and actions. David's reaction to losing access to my resources and support revealed that he had been the dependent party in our relationship, despite his attempts to convince me otherwise through verbal abuse and psychological manipulation that temporarily succeeded in confusing my understanding of our respective contributions and value to the partnership. Looking back on David's declaration that I was useless and my decision to use the prenuptial agreement to recover my assets and restore my independence, I realized that his cruelty actually provided the motivation and clarity I needed to escape from a relationship that was destroying my financial security and emotional well-being while providing nothing except frustration and disappointment in return for my generosity and support. The chauffeured car that transported me to reclaim my property was a symbol of the success and independence that had always been mine, but that I had temporarily allowed someone else to exploit and undervalue through manipulation and abuse disguised as marriage and partnership. Was I justified in using the prenuptial agreement to recover my assets immediately after David's verbal abuse? Or should I have attempted to work through our problems before taking such decisive action to protect my financial interests? Should someone who has been supporting their spouse's failed business ventures be expected to continue that support indefinitely, regardless of the personal cost and lack of appreciation? Or does financial abuse combined with verbal cruelty justify immediate protective action? Would you have responded differently if someone called you useless while living entirely off your financial support and taking credit for your business expertise? Sometimes the most effective response to manipulation and abuse is swift action that demonstrates the manipulator's actual dependence on their victim, while establishing boundaries that protect the victim's resources and dignity from further exploitation by someone who has proven themselves unworthy of trust and support.